Hello, everybody, and welcome into today's episode of Around the Slice. As we're geared towards the NFL draft a week or so out, I brought on a special guest to help me preview from the draft from a Bills perspective. He was on last year around free agency time. Now he's here to Bills fans to help me preview the draft. Zach Lang. Zach, thank you for taking time to join me today and talk some Bills draft and some other things.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Now, before we get into draft stuff, which I'm sure everyone is here for, I just wanted to get into some big picture questions slash topics. So we'll jump right in. Now? I know this has been a hot topic. Some Bills fans, some national media, and whatnot, and other people. Is the Bills window, like Super Bowl window specifically, now closed post Stefon Diggs trade without Stefon Diggs?
I mean, I think the immediate answer is no. Like, as long as Josh Allen is the quarterback, I think the Bills will always stand a chance when it comes to the Super Bowl. But, I mean, it's very easy to look at all the people that are now gone from the team. You know, Stefon Diggs, obviously the biggest name, but Tre'Davious White, Mitch Morse was kind of a surprise. It's easy to look at all the losses they've had to go through this offseason for salary cap reasons and not wonder, is this team worse on paper? But, I mean, we've seen the Chiefs win 2 Super Bowls with 2 very mid groups of wide receivers and without a clear number 1 wide receiver. So if we're talking strictly from the Stefon Diggs perspective, I don't think losing Stefon Diggs means their window is closed.
Right, like you mentioned, the Chiefs obviously Patrick Mahomes helped, but after trading away superstar wide receiver and Tyreek Hill, they still won 2 in a row after that.
Exactly.
My feeling is maybe I'm not going to say it's closed either, so I agree with you. Maybe it's not as wide open as it was 2-3 years ago. Like when Josh Allen's still in his prime though. So my feeling is, as long as you have Josh Allen and surround him with like sufficient enough weapons, keep the cupboard stocked, if you will, and full, they'll always like be in that upper echelon Super Bowl window.
Right. They'll always have a conversation. I think the hardest part is like last season specifically with Aaron Rodgers going down, a couple teams like the Chargers missing out, Joe Burrow going down, and the Bengals not even making the playoffs. I think last year it was very easy to look at it as this is the best chance the Bills had as far as going to get a Super Bowl, and they just could not get past the Chiefs again in the playoffs. So now you look at it, another missed chance. You go into this offseason and you lose more players than you add. And now everyone's going to be back at full health. And assuming on paper everybody stays healthy next season, it's going to be a lot harder this year. But it's with Josh Allen at quarterback. If he stays healthy, the Bills will always stand a chance.
Yeah, one more point on that. I wouldn't say the Bills are rebuilding. Maybe they're like retooling, resetting. But it's clear, like the mantra going into this offseason still is this offseason. They're getting younger and cheaper in multiple different spots. A youth movement, if you will. Would you agree with that?
Totally agree. I mean, when you look at Josh Allen's contract, this is the first year that his extension is kicking in. So naturally, you have to retool all of your salary to make sure you fit under the cap restrictions. So that's why we had to see all those, veterans and pillars of the teams of years past, go. And that's what stinks. But now, we'll talk about it later with the draft, but we're going to see this team get a lot younger, kind of like what we just saw with the Ravens, this past season.
The only thing, I wouldn't say I'm nervous about this, the only thing that worries me a little bit is 4 of 6 captains have now left, big leadership guys, and Mitch Morse, Jordan Poyer, assumably Micah Hyde retiring, although he hasn't announced it yet. Gabe Davis as well. I want to say I'm nervous, but are you a little worried about the outgoing leadership and, who can step up and whatnot?
No, because I think one thing that is overlooked is Deion Dawkins got his extension, which is very well deserved from, his performance. And people forget he was a captain until this past season when Gabe Davis, kind of took the captain patch from him. So I fully expect Deion Dawkins to be a captain again this season. So as far as a leadership perspective goes, you still got Josh and Dawkins on offense.
Now, building off our original topic here, obviously the Bills in the last 2 or 3 years have been eliminated in the playoffs in 3 years in total, with the whole, heartbreaking loss from the Chiefs. Are they still right there at the Super Bowl window or not? Just separately, are they still right there at the top of the class of the AFC, right there toe-to-toe with the Chiefs?
I don't know if I'd say toe-to-toe, because the Chiefs have proven that, despite any sort of shorthandedness on roster positions, specifically wide receiver, they've shown that they can still win a Super Bowl. They've had great, fantastic coaching, great leadership, and, of course, Patrick Mahomes, right? I would not put the Bills in the same category as the Chiefs because they have not been able to get over that hump that the Chiefs have continuously proven that they can get over and ultimately win. So when it comes to the Bills, I would say they're a step below the Chiefs, but they're still right there at the top of the AFC. It's hard to layer everything out now because we still have a draft to go through. There are still going to be some trickles in free agency. So on paper, the Bills look like a lesser team than they were last season. So we have to wait and see by the end of summer camp, by the start of the season, where these AFC contenders are going to be coming from. Last season, we thought the Chargers were going to be a really great team. We don't know how they're going to be this year with a new brand new coach. You're going to have Justin Herbert coming off of a serious injury, and he'll be back. They have no wide receivers as well, so they're going to be retooling at that position. Like, they're going to be a completely different team, and I don't know if that's going to make them worse or better at top of the AFC as well. The Jaguars on paper seem to have gotten not as well because they lost Calvin Ridley to free agency. You have the Titans, which are a huge question mark, but like that's such a huge swing. The Titans could be really good when it comes to, AFC championship competition. The Dolphins are still really good, and most importantly, Aaron Rodgers is coming back for the Jets. So AFC-wise, there's a lot of ebbs and flows that have happened this offseason, and until we get into the first couple of weeks, we're really not going to see where the Bills stand.
Yeah, what's your read on the Houston Texans right now? Obviously, they add Stephon Diggs along with C.J. Stroud, Joe Mixon, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, invested a ton on defensive-minded head coach and D'Amico Ryans, an awesome GM, and Nick Caserio. The talking points have been the Texans maybe leapfrog the Bills, or at least right there with them in terms of like tiers of the AFC, if you will.
I'm not sure if I'd say they leapfrog the Bills, but they're, in my opinion, I think they're a top 3 team in the AFC. C.J. Stroud balled out. You have very good young wide receivers in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. You add a true wide receiver 1 in Stephon Diggs. Their defense is incredible, and their coaching staff is basically all returning. Like, they're also keeping their offensive coordinator who is interviewing for head coaching jobs. That is a huge keep for this offseason. So as far as, what their outlook looks on this season, I could see them winning another playoff game next year or even making it to the, AFC championship. They're a very good team on paper, and everything that made them good last season is continuing into this season.
And let's not forget about the Bengals, too. It sounds like T. Higgins is just going to stay there for this year, and then they'll work it out after, according to the report yesterday. Ja'Marr Chase.
Joe Burrow.
Let's not forget that Joe Burrow got injured with that broken wrist, and now he's coming back.
Right. Honestly, the entire AFC North, like, they were dogs this year. We didn't know who was coming out of that division, right? Yeah. The Steelers arguably underperformed from what they were capable of doing, and they still made the playoffs with the talent they had.
It's just because of Mike Tomlin.
Right. Now they're actually going to have good quarterback play, presumably, if Russell Wilson does end up being a step up from Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph or Mitch Trubisky. We may see Justin Fields end up playing. They got better at the wide receiver position. Their defense is still incredible. Mm-hmm. So we don't know how that's going to shake out. The Ravens are still the Ravens. And like you said, Joe Burrow's coming back for the Bengals. Like, the AFC North is going to compete. So if we're talking about the Bills competing with the rest of the AFC, you have a whole division you now have to worry about when it comes to playoff seeding.
There's only really like 2 or 3, maybe 4 teams in the AFC that I don't think like could make the playoffs. I think like 13 of the 16 realistically could push and compete for the playoffs.
Completely agree.
Next, moving on to our next topic Moving on to our next topic / question. We're going to talk about Josh Allen specifically. The departure of Stephon Diggs, the departure of all those leadership. Obviously, Josh has to step up now in a more leadership role. I know he's not the most like outspoken guy in terms of his leadership, but is there even more pressure specifically on the field on Josh Allen now to not carry this team, but like to step up? Is there even more pressure on Josh Allen now?
That's kind of a loaded question, but I think in the short term, like, I don't think there's going to be a lot more pressure on him because he just has to keep doing the same things he's been doing that have made this team great, specifically what he did in the later half of the season last year to get them to the 2 seed in the AFC. If he keeps playing that specific style of football under Joe Brady, he's going to be fine. I don't think there's going to be more pressure on him. As far as pressure goes, all he has to do is not come out week 1 and look like he did against the Jets week 1 last season. That is what you cannot afford to do unless you want a bunch of unwanted attention on your team. And I get they always block out the noise and all that, but we cannot have another situation where Josh Allen goes out there, has 4 turnovers or whatnot, and then goes and sits up in front of the mic again and says, it's on me. I got to play better. I got to play smarter. That's my fault. We'll learn from this. But I feel like it's almost a broken record in that sense, where we hear that same bit every time we see a performance like that from Josh.
Yeah, and the only thing
we need to see those performances completely disappear. That's as far as pressure goes. That's all we need to see, is just see the lows disappear.
And I know his mindset's great and positive, but I feel like he's not the most an outspoken leader, because last year in the beginning of the season, he was talking about this low positive state of mind. And I was like, what is going on? He looked totally dejected. I feel like he's kind of not quiet, but I feel like he doesn't necessarily push the players and, get in their face as much as maybe he needs to.
Yeah. If we're being honest, I feel like there are a lot of places on this Bills team where you could say there's more pressure or less pressure. As far as Josh goes, he's middle of the list for me as far as places where there should be more pressure. The wide receiver group, there's going to be more pressure because you lost your wide receivers 1 and 2. You're going to need guys to step up immediately. You need Dalton Kincaid to have a stellar second season. There's more pressure on him. You need Dawson Knox to also step up in the receiving game because he's the veteran in this receiving group as well. There's more pressure there. The defense, right? If McDermott is still calling the defense, you need to make sure your defense is championship level, because if your wide receiver group is going to have growing pains, your defense needs to help keep you in these games. There's more pressure on the defense now, especially with a lot of the key guys that you lost in free agency as well as salary cap casualties. So to me, there are way more areas on this team that are going to have more pressure on them than Josh.
Speaking of the defense, one quick thing before we move on to our next point. Not who you think. Who do you want to call the defense? You personally, because we don't know between McDermott or Bobby Babich. So who do you personally want if it were up to you?
Sean McDermott. McDermott, that to me was one of the most not talked about enough storylines of the Bills from the 2023 season.
I agree.
Is how much of a masterclass Sean McDermott did calling the defenses. Leslie Frazier did a pretty good job when he was the defensive coordinator, but there were multiple instances when he was coaching in the playoffs and play calling, specifically 13 seconds versus the Chiefs, where his play calling was very questionable. McDermott, it felt like with the amount of shorthandedness that he was given last season, with Von Miller not playing 100% and not coming in until a little bit later in the season, with losing Tre'Davious White again early in the season, being shorthanded at middle linebacker because Matt Milano got hurt, they were given every reason and every excuse for the defense to underperform, and they played so well down the stretch to help get them the 2 seed that I think McDermott has earned the right to continue to call it the defense this season.
Yeah, and it's not like Bobby Babbitt is just going to be on the sideline. He was named defense coordinator for a reason. So even if he doesn't call it, there's obviously still going to be collaboration. He'll still come up with the game plan.
Absolutely. But I think it can be more of a, working together more so than one person calls the defense, one person does. Bobby Babich is going to have his hands in the defense wherever he needs to. But if you're asking me who deserves to call the defense and who's going to do a better job of calling the defense, it's going to be Sean McDermott.
Although I do wonder this, do you think since McDermott was the de facto defensive coordinator last season and he actually called the defense for the whole season, do you think that kind of, I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, but do you think that kind of took him away from, Josh Allen and his hands in the offense and just overseeing the offense as a whole? Do you think that's why they kind of struggled at a lot of points during the season, because he was just overwhelmed by his defensive duties?
To me, I feel like that's why they struggled in the first half of the season, is because maybe he gave Ken Dorsey more of the reins. And that's why the offense struggled a little bit, is because it wasn't 75% Dorsey, 25% McDermott. It was 100% Dorsey. And that's how they got very complacent down the stretch. The offense, lagged. It was very slow. It was very methodical. And it's everything that Josh Allen did not thrive in. And that's why they made the change to Joe Brady. And I don't know if there was more input from McDermott when Joe Brady took over because Joe Brady became the interim. But now Joe Brady's the full-time OC. So for me, I expect everything that worked out well last season to continue into this season. And especially with the lack of wide receiver experience on the squad, I would expect to see Josh running the ball a little bit more. I would expect to see Joe Brady, trying out whatever he can to make sure this team can get those big plays without, all that experience from a guy like Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, because with Ken Dorsey, it was either deep shot downfield, I feel like, or nothing else. When Joe Brady took over as the interim offense coordinator and now permanent,
Yes.
there was a huge, very large uptick in design runs for Josh Allen. I think that unlocked the offense, honestly.
Right. And it's like, you got to remember, Josh Allen's not like a miniature pony, right? Like, you can't just keep him corralled up the entire time. He's a stallion, right? Like, you got to let him loose. If you don't let Josh play his style of football, you are holding back your team. And we saw that last season.
And now Joe Brady, to your point, will get a whole offseason to implement his game plan and tailor it to the guys and players he wants. Yeah, last year he kind of did trickle here and there, but that was really Ken Dorsey's offense, if you will. So now he has a whole offseason to implement his style and his style of play.
Exactly.
Next topic. So this is kind of interesting. I know it's like very early, haven't even hit the draft yet, training camp, whatnot. But if you were to say what is one X factor on offense and defense, we'll start with offense. This is going to be an underrated player right now, a player you feel like this early out, people aren't hyping up enough for next season. Just a player that maybe is flying under the radar. What is one X factor on, we'll do offense first for next season.
For me, I think it's Curtis Samuel. I mean, the wide receiver position for the Bills is going to be the most talked about thing throughout the entire offseason. It already has been. It's going to have a huge microscope on it. Everyone's going to keep talking about this position group until we get to see it in real time for week 1. And for me, Curtis Samuel was a great signing. I've seen a couple opinion pieces where people say they're setting Curtis Samuel up for failure. And I don't understand that. Like, Curtis Samuel is a great wide receiver too. You're going to need to add somebody else, whether it's a Brandon Ayuk or a T. Higgins, which I don't think that's realistic.
You need an alpha, yeah.
Yeah, you're still going to need to add an alpha or, a wide receiver 1 on draft night. But Curtis Samuel is an absolute plus for this offense. This is a guy who has shown success on the stat sheet with no elite quarterback experience under center every time he's taken a snap. This is a guy who's played for the Carolina Panthers, has played for the Washington football team, Commanders, whatever you want to call it. He's played for Washington, right? Like, he's played for Kyle Allen twice. He's played for Taylor Heineke. This past season, he played for Sam Howell and played pretty well because Howell, had some great flashes. But it's like, this is a guy who has shown that he can show up without elite quarterback play. Now he has Josh Allen throwing to him. If you can get a bunch of targets from this guy, Curtis Samuel could be one of the best wide receiver 2s in the league. And I think people shouldn't count them out because of the fact they don't have a wide receiver 1 yet, because Curtis Samuel can do what is asked of him.
He can line up in the backfield even for a handful of snaps. And speaking of lining up in the backfield, in 2020, he had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, so like 800-something receiving, 300-something rushing. And guess who was the OC? Joe Brady. And that was Teddy Bridgewater. So now with reunion with Joe Brady and Josh Allen, who by far is the best quarterback. Like, he hasn't even had like a decent quarterback. So Josh Allen being an elite quarterback.
It's not even close how much of a jump it is going to be to go from whoever the best quarterback he's played in the past, whether it's Teddy Bridgewater or Sam Howell, to Josh Allen, right? So, like, the leap is there. But if you can capitalize on the execution, and like you said, the chemistry he already has with Joe Brady, which was probably his best season, then we're gonna see a really good tooled offense. And I think most importantly, when it comes to this offense, just talking vaguely about the wide receiver group for a second.
Yeah.
If the Bills don't get a true wide receiver 1 in this draft, right? They don't add a guy like T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk in the offseason. And you go into it with potentially like 2 wide receiver 2s. Still don't see that as a bad thing for this offense. Because the Bills had Stephon Diggs as a wide receiver 1 and still won like however many straight games to make the playoffs, and he didn't have a 100-yard receiving game in any of those.
He was awful, to put it.
The Bills do not need a true wide receiver 1 to have success. If you spread the ball out really well and methodically and intentionally between guys like Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, if James Cook can, reduce some of those drops in key moments and he has a key hand in the receiving game, the Bills are going to be fine. They're going to be fine.
You mentioned Dawson Knox, and actually, good segue, because that is my X factor. Everyone talks about Curtis Samuel, like you mentioned and explained. Dalton Kincaid, which looks like he'll have 120, maybe pushing 150 targets. Matt Collins sprinkled in here and there. Justin Shorter, Khalil Shakir, huge year. Dawson Knox, I don't want to say he's forgotten, but he was hampered and limited by a wrist injury last year. And with the 2 tight end, 12 personnel that the NFL is trending, specifically the Bills here in this conversation, he's still a great, maybe not great blocker, but he's still better blocker than Dalton Kincaid. And he's still a very, very good red zone weapon. So I feel like kind of Dawson Knox is flying under the radar because when people mention all those weapons, top weapons, and adding a wide receiver 1 alpha in the draft, in the first round. Assumably, they don't talk about Dawson Knox.
Right. And he's such a good guy in the red zone.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about, pushing down the field, he can grab those like 5-6 yard receptions for you. He's never going to be like the huge chunk play kind of guy, right? But when you get the ball in his hands and he gets an angry run in there, he's great. And when you get into the red zone and you need a quick 5-6 yard pass just in the corner of the end zone, he's there. We've seen that multiple times, especially the Dolphins playoff game from 2 years ago, that crazy one-handed snag he had. If he can bring back some of that sort of level of execution, Bills' receiving game is going to be great.
Fun fact, Dawson Knox has had the very first touchdown of the Bills for the last 3 playoffs. So he's actually shows up in big moments.
Incredible.
Only thing with him I'll say is I think you'd agree, but he has some really frustrating drops sometimes, so he's got to kind of cut that down. But
I think what the best part about that is now that you have a guy like Dalton Kincaid in a 12-man personnel situation, Dawson Knox isn't going to be getting nearly as many targets as he was before Dalton Kincaid. And Dalton Kincaid has shown that he doesn't have a lot of aggravating drops, maybe 1 or 2 last season. But now that you're splitting, passes up and targets between 2 tight ends, as long as Dawson Knox can, capitalize on the couple of passes he's going to get every game, then they'll be fine.
Yeah, and you see the NFL is trending this way. They're going heavy 12 personnel with starting 2 tight ends. They're going heavy 13 personnel starting 2 running backs. So, and teams are doing more jumbo packages these days. So I feel like Dawson Knox is a very critical piece for that.
Exactly.
Let's flip over to our side of the ball. Who's your one X, same kind of ideology, methodology as the offense. Who's your one X factor for defense for next season, one player?
For me, I think this is like the easiest question you could ask any Bills fan is the answer is Von Miller, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy with every accolade you can name, including Super Bowl MVP. He's on the tail end of his career. He's getting a little bit older.
Hall of Famer.
But Hall of Famer, like undoubted Hall of Famer. The problem is I think this ACL injury that he had did a lot more damage than people think. I don't think he played 100% in a single game last season. Like he was limping, walking out of the tunnel in some games. And it's like, then why is he playing? We saw multiple instances last season where AJ Epinesa was starting at edge over Von Miller because Von Miller seemed like he was playing 100%. He was limited in his snap count when he was playing for almost the entire season. And I think maybe had 1 total impact play the entire season. And I think it was in the playoffs against the Chiefs maybe. But it was like when he made that tackle, I remember because we were texting back and forth. And I remember we were like, oh my gosh, he actually made like a key play. Like where
he showed up
been all season.
There he is.
Right. So I think, and for me, his mindset is that he is getting back to 100% Vaughn. The restructure of his contract not only helped the team, but most importantly, he's betting on himself because all of that money that he put aside in that restructure was put in incentives. So there's extra motivation for him to perform this season. So I think because of that monetary motivation, because hopefully he's 100% now and has a full off season where there's no injury to worry about, if he can get back to what he was from the first season when he started with the Bills, then I think this Bills defense can be very special. But if he doesn't, then we're going to see a real glaring problem at the edge position during the season.
Yeah, and I agree with that. We were treating Von Miller, it's not a joke, we were treating Von Miller like he was an undrafted free agent, like tracking, oh my God, he made a play.
Right.
He totaled 3 tackles on the season. Literally, that's his stats. That's it.
Not great.
My one X factor on defense, this might surprise you, but Dorian Williams. Obviously, I'm not saying a starting linebacker. You have Terrell Bernard at middle linebacker.
Matt Milano's coming back.
Yeah, Matt Milano, weak side linebacker. But Dorian Williams, I think, pretty sure he'll win the LB3 job over Nicholas Morrow. Who knows, but I think he will. And I mentioned earlier how more teams on offense are going 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, or heavy 13 personnel with 2 running backs or jumbo packages. On the flip side, in defense, that means teams are having more and more 3 linebacker sets in the field. And people are going to ask, well, what does that mean? Would you take a slot corner like Taron Johnson off the field? I don't think that at all. I think you can keep Taron on the field and take either Mike Edwards or Taylor Rapp off the field and have Taron act like a split zone safety or slot safety, if you will. So I feel like defenses are trending more and more to that 3 linebackers. And I think Dorian Williams will be very crucial in that.
Totally agree.
Now we got that X factor. One last thing before we transition to after actual draft talk. The Brandon Ayuk trade rumors. It was kind of confusing picture painted, if you will, the other day, because first it was reported from a couple of people that he requested a trade from the 49ers, and then his agent came out and said he didn't request a trade, and then he did and didn't. I don't know.
Also unfollowed the 49ers on Instagram because
that's the new age receiver thing.
That's the NFL's version of quiet quitting.
Yeah, I'm done. But the more I think about this, is that the Bills can't afford this, right? Like, I'm not saying the trade value, but like the pure money and cap, they have like $2.5-3 million at most in cap right now. They have to take on his hard $15 million 5th-year option in 2024. You can't change that. And then on top of that, you have to extend him for 4 or 5 years beyond that. So I don't know. I know people say cap isn't real. It is. And I don't think, like, how are you supposed to fit this in your cash flow and cap spending?
Right. I feel like everybody agrees in the fact that the team would get significantly better if they found a way to make this all work out.
He's an alpha in San Francisco because they have about 3
To me, Brandon Ayuk is one of those very few guys who is wide receiver 2 on his team, but would be a wide receiver 1 on almost every other team he could be on. I think another guy who fits in that same conversation is T. Higgins. Right. Obviously, we've seen him get, a bit upset with the fact that he hasn't gotten his extension and he got franchise tag. So he and Ayuk are in the same conversation and are also in the same breath when everybody talks about who is a wide receiver 1 the Bills could add. The problem is exactly how you laid it out. Can they afford it? And I think the answer is no. Like, if Bills want to be smart about this, you are now in the extension era of Josh Allen's salary. So he is getting paid more, which means everybody else has to get paid less. And we saw that this offseason with the number of people that got cut. So if you want to bring in an alpha wide receiver who is in the last year of his contract, who has to be extended massively for 4 more years, like, I just don't see how you can fit that in your plans. The only thing to me that makes sense is, like how you said, I don't know how they would make it work for this year, because then you'd have to get rid of some other people, retool some things here and there, convert to signing bonuses or whatever, not like however you figure that out.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, when it comes to Stephon Diggs' dead cap hit, that's only for this season. You're paying $30 million for this season, and then he's gone, and that's it. And then after that, you're free to do whatever you want. But the smart play, so hypothetically, the money could be there for that extension. You're just shorthanding yourself intentionally for future seasons. And that, to me, is why, as much as I would love the idea of Brandon Ayuk on the Bills paired with Curtis Samuel, the smarter option is to try and hit a home run in the draft. The problem is it's just a significantly riskier thing to do because you're saving a ton of money, but you don't know how this new wide receiver is going to play out in this offense. Whereas with Brandon Ayuk, you know exactly the kind of player that he is and the kind of talent that he can bring to your team. Would I love to see Brandon Ayuk on this team? Yes. Do I ultimately think it's going to happen? No, because I don't think the money situation is feasible.
To that point, I now that I feel like I know for a fact, this is the first offseason that Brandon Beane, like, it's been pretty quiet. Yeah, Tremaine Edmonds had to leave, but this is the first offseason where he's actually had to make some really tough decisions and move on for a lot of captains and leaders. He's never had to do that before.
Right. And I think that's what's tough is, we've talked about it before. It's a changing of the guard of sorts, right? Like,
yeah,
I think losing Mitch Morse is a huge, it's a huge downgrade on this offense. But that's why you brought in McGovern, is because you thought that you could move him to center and see how things work out. Granted, I think Lael Collins is a fantastic signing to help bolster that offensive line. An offensive line that had the same exact set of 5 starters for every single game last season.
One of only 3
That's
teams.
why I was like, I don't know why you're making any changes to the offensive line, because they've shown that they can play super well, very efficiently, and stay healthy. So why they made any changes to that, I'm not entirely sure. But, I mean, losing Trey White, you also have to come to the realization he just can't stay healthy. And that's a tough decision you had to make, but ultimately it does make sense. And you also have Rasul Douglas, who you're going to have to extend at some point. And I think he showed that he was one of the most important players on defense all last season, making incredible plays. So does it stink that there are a lot of players that were very notable names and faces on this team that aren't going to be there this season? Yes. But do I think this team can still compete with the roster that they've constructed, even though Brandon Beane's been quiet? I think so. But we also have to tell ourselves it's only April. we got a whole offseason to go,
Yeah.
right? Like the T. Higgins situation isn't going to go away. If Brandon Ayuk truly does want to trade from the 49ers, that's not going to go away. OBJ is still on the market and hasn't signed his deal with the Dolphins yet. Like, there are guys out there still. So I don't expect the Bills to just stay quiet and just be like, this is our roster until September. Like,
Yeah,
they're still going to make moves.
They have till week 1 in September 5th or whatever it is.
Exactly.
One last point, and then we'll move on to the draft talk. When you're talking about a couple of these guys, Jordan Poyer, especially Jordan Poyer, perfect example is if Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott and staff wanted to keep him, or them, I should say, they would have. Like Jordan Poyer just signed for 1 year, $2 million with the Dolphins. They could have figured it out. It wasn't just about money. They saw the decline, and unfortunately, they saw this is what he's going to be for the rest of his career. Like if they wanted to keep him, they could have.
Right. I think the safety position, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later when we talk about draft stuff, but the safety position is very interesting to me because, I mean, Micah Hyde hasn't officially retired yet.
Yeah,
I think that's the interesting part is like the assumption is he is going to officially retire. It hasn't happened yet. Brandon Beane's almost talked about it like he could come back for one more season.
Door's still open.
Exactly. The door is still open. But with Hyde and Poyer, they were a fantastic tandem for this team and a great lockdown defenders for years. The problem is Father Time always wins, right? Jordan Poyer's gone injury after injury after injury. Micah Hyde, the same thing. So the question is, when is the time to move on and get some youth in this building? And I think they're starting to make that transition. Last season when they brought in Taylor Rapp, and especially this offseason when they decided to bring him back. Because I think Taylor Rapp is a great replacement at safety. He knows the system, and he's ultimately going to play better this season than he did last season, and now he has the potential to be a starter. I wouldn't be surprised if they drafted a safety as well. Honestly, I wouldn't hate if they brought Micah Hyde back for one more season, but we're definitely at the end of, the Hyde-Poyer safety tandem age, and it doesn't surprise me at all that Poyer was one of the guys who got hit with the pink slip.
Yeah, those are good nuggets addressing the Ayuk trade rumors conversation, whatever it is. Now moving into actual draft talk. I want to talk about trading up, trading down, and staying put and sticking and picking at 28. First, trading up. I've gone back and forth on this. Ultimately, I've decided I think you'd have to give up too much. I know you would. If you're going all the way from 28 to, let's say, the Bears, because they have 2 first-round picks, to 9 to get Rome Odunze. Odunze is like an elite prospect, but that's like 28, 60, a first next year, and then another 4th or 5th next year. Like, that's a lot.
I think it's completely unrealistic to think that the Bills are going to trade up into the top 10, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze are arguably going to be the top 3 wide receivers taken. I don't think there's anyone who thinks another wide receiver is going to hop into that group, but those guys should be taken top 10. And I think the problem is there are teams in the top 10 that will probably select or get antsy and move up a little bit to select guys sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
To me, it is unrealistic to think that the Bills would get rid of all the draft capital that they've amassed to move up and get one of these guys. And I think what the Bills should do is do your scouting homework, understand that those 3 guys are basically untouchable, and focus on the one guy that you think is going to be a great first-round addition in relation to like 10 picks within your current spot at 28. That's what happened last year with Dalton Kincaid when they moved up a couple spots to go and grab him, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they do again this year. Moving into the top 10, the Bills have done a good job of amassing draft capital. To me, it would be a waste to get rid of all of that and then some just to say, hey, we got a top 10 wide receiver. I don't think that's necessary. Whereas with the Bills, I think the most likely scenario that we see come draft night on Thursday would be them moving up a couple spots to draft the wide receiver that they ultimately want and secure that guy, just like how they did with Dalton Kincaid last season.
Yeah, like if Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, you've seen Brandon Beane move up slightly. Moved up a couple of spots for Kyer Elam, but moved up a couple of spots for Dalton Kincaid. That looks like a slam dunk home run. If Brian Thomas Jr., elite, close, maybe great receiver from LSU, falls to like 20 to 25, then I think it's realistic to move up a few spots, but we're not moving in the top 10.
Right. And I think we've also seen over the last couple of drafts that just because a wide receiver is projected to be within the first 3 wide receivers picked, whether it's top 10 or second 10, that does not mean they are going to be a slam dunk. your scouts have to do their homework. We have seen situations where guys get drafted ahead of other wide receivers and significantly underperform.
Henry Ruggs.
Like Quentin Johnston is the biggest example. He was what was he the first or second wide receiver taken last season?
So there were 4 wide receivers in a row. So I think it went
right.
Njigba, Johnston, Flowers, and then Addison.
Yes, and it's very easy to say Quentin Johnston was like the least successful out of the last season. And you're going to have to see improvement this season with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen gone from the Chargers. So now he steps into a very tough position where all eyeballs are going to be on him. And I feel like for the Bills, it may be beneficial to not give this wide receiver that you're going to draft a hard position to perform in. Obviously, all eyeballs are going to be on whoever this guy is because he's going to be immediately thrown into the wide receiver 1 category and have a lot of pressure under him. But you add way more pressure onto this guy if you draft him in the top 10 picks because now there's a ton of expectations that come with that. If you draft a wide receiver from 25 to 32, then those expectations not nearly as harsh. Then you have a guy like Rashee Rice from last year with the Chiefs, who does he step in and be the wide receiver 1? Yeah, but also you have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, and because you were selected at the end of round 1, no one's expecting you to be like a Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, you were mentioning players sometimes slip for no reason. I mean, look at 2020, CeeDee Lamb out of Oklahoma. CeeDee Lamb had no business slipping to 28. There he was for the Cowboys at 18, excuse me. There he was for the Cowboys
at 18, pretty well.
18. Or Justin Jefferson, yeah.
Right. That's also another instance where, Jalen Reagor got taken before Justin Jefferson, right? And we all saw how that panned out. So just because a wide receiver is taken before whoever the Bills decide to select does not mean that the Bills get a lesser product.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about trading back. Not a huge trade back, but because of the depth of this wide receiver class, do you think that's on the table? I mean, every year Bean says, last year said literally in his press conference, if I were a betting man, like I would say we'd trade back. Well, he traded up a couple of spots for Kincaid. So take his word what you will. Take it, don't take it. But if they move from like 28 to 35, 28 to 36, I feel like they can still get an impact receiver just because of the depth of this class.
Can I be honest? Yeah. I love the idea of moving back. I think it's most likely that they're going to move up like 2 or 3 spots to get whoever the guy is they want, just because they're like, let's just draft him, secure it, and get it over with because I don't want to take any chances with someone else taking this guy.
Yeah.
For me, I love the idea of trading back. The problem with trading back out of the first round, because here's the other thing. If the Bills trade back, since they're sitting at 28, it's either they move back like 1 or 2 spots because a team gets antsy, or they trade out of the first round completely. The problem with trading out of the first round completely is you're going to have everyone immediately questioning Friday morning, what are the Bills doing? Like you said, the wide receiver class is so deep. You have all these guys there. If the Bills trade back from 28 to the second round and like 2 wide receivers get picked in those picks after them before they can pick again, everyone's going to say, what are you doing? Why, the wide receivers are there. Why aren't you taking them? Why are you choosing to be conservative? But what I love about that's just the immediate impact. And that's not going to have an impact for anything other than Thursday night and a Friday morning before we start the second round, right? Yeah. I love the idea of them trading back from the first round to the early second round. You have 2 second-round picks now, and I think you use both of them on wide receivers. You get additional draft capital. You can have 2 guys that now don't have a glaring spotlight on them because they're a coveted first-round pick. And there's less expectations of them outside of potentially competing for a wide receiver 1 spot. But now you can use that extra pick to draft an extra wide receiver, and you have a better chance of hitting on a true wide receiver 1 or a stud in your offense. There are guys that are back there like Jalen Polk from Washington. Roman Wilson from Michigan is a guy I absolutely love. And
Ricky Pearsall.
Ricky Pearsall is a guy who could also be a great chemistry guy because we haven't seen anything out of Justin Shorter yet. And now you get 2 Florida teammates together. And when you get that chemistry going, that brings out the best in some of these players. If you brought in a Ricky Pearsall and now Justin Shorter's playing at a good level, like that is a great scenario for the Bills. So I think if you trade back into the second round and just use that extra capital to just get an extra guy to give yourself all that extra security going into training camp, knowing you have a larger pool of guys who could fill in that glaring hole of wide receiver, I love this option.
Yeah, trading back, you don't mean the Bills. You don't have a 3rd-round pick right now, so pick up a 3rd in that instance. And like you said, maybe not pigeonholing a guy in a spotlight in round 1, but giving yourself a couple or 3 chances, more of a chance to hit on a potential wide receiver 1 by picking up a third, which you don't have right now.
Exactly. And I think one thing that people get a little over enamored with is you need that one big spotlight first round guy. Like, this is our guy. And if you look at some of the big name like top 10 wide receivers in the league right now, right? Not all of them were first round picks. Like,
Not
obviously
a lot.
You have the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases who were taken at 5. But like, you have some big name receivers who were taken in later rounds. I mean, Stephon Diggs wasn't a first round pick.
Amon-Ra
He's
St.
turned out to
Brown.
be a stud. Right? Like, we've seen very good wide receivers come out of mid to late rounds. And I would not be surprised if the Bills try to go that route by trading back if the guy they want in the first round gets picked first.
Like DK Metcalf, he was the first top 15 first rounder all day. He had no business getting the very last pick of the second round, but he did.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is there is hidden gold in some of these rounds outside of the first.
Now, sticking and picking at 28, like no move up, no move down. At 28, you're probably looking at A.D. Mitchell or Ladd McConkey or someone like that. But like I fall in love with Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell, and I look at that as like that's perfectly fine. Like I'm not going to be upset if they stay at 28 and pick either one of those two.
Right. I wouldn't either. The one thing that to me is so interesting about this is I feel like them staying pat at 28 is the least likely scenario.
I agree.
When you look at the shortcomings of this team and how they've had to retool some of their offensive pieces and defense and all the guys they've had to cut, like the thought of trading back to get some draft capital and just retool and get another guy in the building is so enticing. I mean, if the guy you want if you're like foaming at the mouth to get this specific wide receiver and you got to move up 2 positions to get him, you're going to go and do it. We saw them do it with Kincaid last year. But I just don't see the Bills sitting at 28 and just being like, all right, we got our guy. Like, if you can move back 2 positions and still get the guy you want, then they're going to do it. I think most likely there's a guy, everybody's talking about Adonai Mitchell. Like, I think that would be a great pick for them. Ladd McConkey is also very interesting for them because I think Ladd McConkey fits the stereotypical interior wide receiver that Josh Allen thrives having. The problem is you already have a guy like Khalil Shakir who thrives in those scenarios. And Curtis Samuel can play that role as well. So the question is, what kind of wide receiver are you trying to draft? Because Ladd McConkey could fit the Bills' offense very well. Adonai Mitchell, to me, he's a great outside threat. So if they're trying to go that route, they can do that. Xavier Legette is a guy who I think could also really, really help this Bills' offense.
Picking up steam.
So the question is realistically not, is a wide receiver available? It's what is the type of receiver that you were trying to give Josh Allen to tool in his offense? And if he is sitting right there at 28, then sure, pick him. If you can move back 2 picks, get some draft capital, and still take him because the 2 teams in front of you now definitely are not taking a receiver, you do that in a heartbeat. If you trade back into the second round and you still get a guy like Polk out of Washington and that's what you want, they're going to do it. But I just don't see them staying pat at 28 and just being like, there we go. We're good. We got our guy.
Well, to that point, like I was thinking, maybe trade back, pick up a third, which you don't have right now, or pick up an extra second by trading back, maybe at like 35, 36, and pick 60. You draft 2 receivers in 1 round, and they fill different skill sets for you, 2 different flavors, if you will.
Right. And I think the biggest question is, what are the Chiefs going to do at 32? That, to me, when it comes to the trading back scenarios, that interests me a lot because the Chiefs, to me, are also kind of a lock to draft a wide receiver, considering the fact that they once again won a Super Bowl without a clear wide receiver 1. You know, Kadarius Toney, you had all those issues. Rashee Rice now has off-season issues. Like, what is going to happen to the wide receiver group of the Kansas City Chiefs? You now need to once again add a young guy because you're just so thin at that position. And also, they also lost Marquez Valdes-Scantling in free agency. Yeah. So you need another wide receiver. So for the Bills, the question is, if you're at 28 and you know 4 picks later the Chiefs are picking, the last thing you want is your number 1 rival in the AFC to pick the guy that you think is the guy that can best help out your team. So if you think the Chiefs are, circled Ladd McConkey and that's who they want, but the Bills are like, we don't want that type of a wide receiver. We prefer a Xavier Legette, who maybe we can get in the second round. then you could see the Bills trading back into the second round. But if you do want a Ladd McConkey and the Chiefs are circled on Ladd McConkey, you can still trade back 2-3 positions and still take that guy and still take him from him before the Chiefs have the opportunity, assuming they don't trade up.
Yeah, so I feel like trade back is honestly the most likely scenario here. I think talking through it, you would agree, right?
I mean, I think I just said previously that trading up is most likely because Bean has a history of that. Specifically,
well, personally, you
with Dalton Kincaid. But now that we've talked it through, I think trading back makes a lot more sense. As long as it's, like I said, the immediate impact with everybody being like, what are the Bills doing trading out of the first round on draft night and not taking a guy when they need a wide receiver? That would be the only thing to me is if they did trade back, it wouldn't be that far because they don't want that, even if they have a game plan.
Now, assuming, like, let's just hypothetically say in this scenario, they stay at 28 and stick and pick.
Mm-hmm.
Are we considering other positions? Basically, is it wide receiver or bust for the Bills in the first round, staying at 28? Is it wide receiver or bust, basically?
Yeah, it's wide receiver or bust. Like, if you take any position other than wide receiver at 28 or trade up or trade back, it to me, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we've talked at length previously about, other players that the Bills could draft. And when you have a position group this heavy at wide receiver, take advantage of it and just draft 2 wide receivers then. You need, the Bills in previous seasons have not had as many glaring holes as they have had this offseason, with the biggest glaring hole being wide receiver. Last year, drafting Dalton Kincaid was kind of a question mark at first because it was like, the Bills have Dawson Knox. Why do you need another tight end? But then it made sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Drafting Kyer Elam made sense because you didn't really have a hole at cornerback, but it certainly helps you. This season, it's very clear Stephon Diggs is gone. Your next best wide receiver is Curtis Samuel or Khalil Shakir. You need another guy in that wide receiver room. So you should not be looking at anyone else in the first round at all.
Yeah.
At all.
I tend to agree with you. Now, moving on to the next topic / question. It's fun to look at kind of doomsday scenarios that we really get confused about. Again, hypothetically assuming they stay at pick 28, what is one position that will make you very confused and question Brandon Meat? What is one position that they would pick at pick 28 that would make you go to bed next Thursday night and be like, what are we doing? Like, why did they do that?
Anything other than wide receiver? Like, I know you said one position, but like anything that is not wide receiver, why are you drafting that? To me, the only other positions maybe other than wide receiver that would make sense is safety, because we talked about how Hyde might retire, Poyer's gone, you re-sign Taylor Rapp, you still really need another safety in that room, because if I'm being honest, I'm not sure if I see DeMar Hamlin making it out of summer camp on this roster, so you need to bring in some other guys to stay on this team, and safety is a position they are going to have to draft at some point. If you think you can get a good wide receiver in round 2 and draft a safety in round 1 that is a guy that you have circled with a big red marker, then sure. But otherwise, I don't understand any other position they could draft at 28 that makes sense.
If Cooper DeJean is there, I know he played corner at Iowa, but I think his athleticism is most showcased at safety. If Cooper DeJean is there at 28, like that's the one exception I would heavily consider drafting him.
Right, especially if we get into a scenario like last year where, say, Cooper DeJean makes it to 26 and no one's pulled on him, and the Bills are like, we don't want anyone else to do this. We're trading up and we're getting him, and we'll take a wide receiver in round 2. Sure, that could make sense to me. But again, wide receiver is the glaring hole on this team. Fill it immediately.
My position, I'll be very confused about CB, cornerback. I mean, Mel Kiper mainly is drafting us TJ Tampa in the first round. I don't get, like, people say, well, Rasul Douglas is 31. I wouldn't mind a midseason extension. Well, Christian Benford this. But I think it's rooted in, other than Buffalo and Bills Mafia, people don't understand, like, how good Christian Benford is and will be. I think Christian Benford's, like, not a lot of outside people's radars. Like, I think it's rooted in people just don't understand how good Christian Benford really is.
Right, and I think he was hurt a little bit last season in certain moments, and that's why in those games people were saying that the Bills' cornerback position wasn't as great. I think where they stand now with Benford at 2 and Rasul Douglas at 1, I think isn't a terrible place to be at. I think you definitely at some point draft a cornerback in this draft just to get somebody else in that room.
Not
but you
first
don't
round.
need to do it immediately. Certainly not first round. Like, if we're talking about secondary positions as a whole, the safeties need way more help than the cornerbacks do because of the amount of turnover your team is having. And also, the Bills have proven year after year after year that if there is like not a glaring hole, but a slight hole on your team, they've proved that they can find someone in-house to fill those shoes as well, if not better, than the guy before that season. Last season, it was Terrell Bernard replacing Tremaine Edmonds. We were all sitting there before week one being like, why aren't we bringing in any of these?
Like, this guy sucks.
Right. We're like, Terrell Bernard doesn't make any sense. Like, Tremaine Edmonds was great for us. And then Terrell Bernard goes out and gives a Pro Bowl worthy season. And we're like, okay, clearly they know a lot more than us. And that's why we're sitting at home and not wearing coaching gear. So it makes sense that the Bills office will like potentially not go after a cornerback, because if they like how Benford performed last season, when Tre'Davious White went down, going out and getting a guy like Rasul Douglas, who was phenomenal since bringing him in. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to try and go and find a starter. Not to mention, Kaiir Elam is still on the team. That is the other thing. That's another question for this offseason that I just don't know how they're going to go about it. It felt like they were going to cut him or trade him before the deadline last season. And he stayed on the team, and he still came into some games and made some plays. So the question is, what is the goal for him? Are you trying to get him back? Is the goal to make him the starter over Benford at some point? Are you going into the summer camp being like, you two are now duking it out for CB2? Or is he going to be a great rotation guy now that Dane Jackson is gone? That's the question.
I think it's more likely he is the new Dame Jackson than whoever we draft is your special teams developmental guy in the 5th round or whatever.
Right. And then obviously you have Taron Johnson sitting at the nickel.
Yeah, top 3 nickel corner. Let's stack their needs 1 through 5. What are your current needs for the Bills' position needs heading into the draft for next Thursday? Again, 1 through 5.
1 through 5, I would say number 1's wide receiver. I mean, I think that's easy
obvious.
Number 1. It's the biggest glaring hole the Bills have had in an offseason in the last probably 4 or 5 years.
Under Bean and McDermott.
Right. Yeah. So I think you have to get wide receiver as early as you can. But like we talked about, if you trade back into a 2nd round, if you get another wide receiver, like however you do it, you just need to make sure that box is checked at the end of the draft.
Yeah.
Number 2 for me would be safety. Also, don't need to get back into it super much. But again, if they drafted a safety in the 1st round, I wouldn't be shocked. But to me, drafting a safety on day 2 seems like a lock. Number 3, I would say defensive tackle, just because you need some depth at that position. Ed Oliver was great in the 1st year of his extension last year. I think you just need some depth now that Tim Settle is gone. And also Jordan Phillips, who was kind of a non-factor last season, is also not in the building anymore. So you just need some depth at the position. And for me, like getting a defensive tackle day 3 or day 4, that makes sense. For me, number 4 is wide receiver again, because the wide receiver room is just it's bland at the moment. I don't think it's bad by having wide receivers by committee without having a clear number 1. Chiefs have proven that they can win a Super Bowl doing it twice, but it, like how we talked about, if you take 2 wide receivers in round 2 or a wide receiver in round 1 and again in round 2, or trade up into round 3 and grab another guy like a Roman Wilson, that to me just makes so much sense. So wide receiver is 1 and 4 on my big board of most important positions, because I don't think you can over-address a position group enough, especially in this offseason. And then for me, number 5, this might be kind of a surprise. I think backup quarterback. I think this season previously, 2023, showed that you need a game plan behind your starter. We have not seen as many backup quarterbacks enter the game as we did last season. It's actually insane when you think the number of guys who have had to come in and try and succeed and carry a team on their playoffs when the face of your franchise goes down, right? Justin Herbert, like they weren't super great last year, but then you have a backup come in and he played pretty well. The Chargers almost beat the Bills, So you have to be careful when it comes to these backup quarterbacks, right? The biggest ones, Jake Browning and Josh Dobbs. These are guys who had to step into the spotlight and did it almost effortlessly. The Bengals were in the playoff talks until the last couple of weeks. The Vikings stood a chance until Josh Dobbs, came down from the mountain a little bit, right? There are so many teams that had to rely on backup quarterbacks. that I do not think it is a terrible idea for the Bills to draft a quarterback on day 3, or even just bring a guy in undrafted free agency. Specifically because I like Trubisky. I think out of the lazy Susan, if you will, of backup quarterbacks that have been behind Josh Allen since he has been with the Bills, I think Trubisky has been the best one. I was not that enamored with Kyle Allen. I thought Case Keenum was a good option when he was there. But to me, it felt like Trubisky was a very comfortable guy in that locker room, specifically that the Bills were willing to bring him back and for a pretty decent deal too. So I think that's great that they have Trubisky in the locker room. But we also saw instances last year where teams had to go to their third quarterback. So just get a third guy in that room that you feel comfortable with. For me, I think what's his name? Sam Hartman out of Notre Dame.
How much I love Notre Dame. So
Right. So for me, it's that's a guy who's not going to get drafted in an early or mid round, presumably. If you can just if you just take him in the 7th round, you might find some gold. You might have a guy who can be Trubisky's on a 1-year deal. You might find a guy in the 7th round who ends up being your backup for years to come, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Look at the Vikings. They literally started 4 different quarterbacks last year.
Yeah.
So my top 5 needs are 1, wide receiver, literally for all the reasons we said plus more. 2 is defensive end. I know you had that a tad lower, but the only guys are Leonard Floyd's gone. The only guy right now I trust is Greg Rousseau. Shaq Lawson hasn't been re-signed yet. I think he will be over the summer, but coming months, I should say, rather. Casey Tuhill, depth guy, whatever. Kingsley Jonathan hasn't done anything. Depth guy, undrafted, whatever. AJ Epinesa, I think, is a great defensive end 3. Von Miller, I don't know what to expect. So Greg Rousseau is the only trustworthy run right now, if you will, and that's about it. And then 3, defensive tackle, you got Austin Johnson. That's a 1-year thing. I still need a backup 3 techs behind Ed Oliver. And then 4, I think, is running back, which one you didn't mention. There's a very specific skills that element needed this rushing game. You need a downhill power rusher. And I think Audric Estime in the 4th or 5th round, give or take, would be good for that from Notre Dame. He's 5'11", 225, 230 pounds. The Bills, your power rusher right now for the Bills is Josh Allen. We can't have, you can have 7 or 8 rushing touchdowns, but we only need 15 in that wear and tear on your body again. And then 5 is safety. Not a big fan of Taylor Rapp. The consensus, Bills Mafia loves him, but his coverage ability isn't there. Yeah, he's a great downhill tackler, but I feel like every time he tackles somebody, either he gets injured or he injures a teammate. So he's got to kind of rein that in, if you will. So safety, just once again, wide receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, running back, and safety in that order. Last topic of the day. I know this has gone on a while, but I conducted a 7-round mock draft last night, whatever, using PFN, Pro Football Network Simulator. I want to go through it, and you want to tell me what you think.
Yeah.
So round 1, again, no trade up, no trade down, nothing. 10 scheduled picks. There's no way they make 10 picks. They're going to make 7 or 8, and 5 or 6 of them make the roster at most. But pick 28, round 1. Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver LSU. I don't know how he got here, but here he is in the simulator. That would be a home run. We both agree, right?
Honestly, I think Brian Thomas Jr. would be good in this offense. And obviously LSU has a great history of producing wide receivers. So I don't think it's necessarily a miss. But to me, I feel like there might be some better guys out there.
Well, pick number 60, I'm doubling up. This is our guy, one of my favorite in the draft, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver floor. So you have a deep threat, true X receiver, explosive plays in Brian Thomas, and you have Ricky Pearsall, who is the phenomenal route runner, one of the best route runners in the class, up there with Ladd McConkey, and his hands are just insane. Remember that? I think you saw it. Remember that one catch against Charlotte? The one against Charlotte where he just went up there with one hand like it was no issue at all?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we all know, no one's going to be able to make that play every single time. But when we talk about the wide receivers of Bills past, specifically Gabe Davis and other guys who have had some significant drops, there have been some drop issues with wide receivers. And if Ricky Pearsall brings a little bit of stability into that, alongside a guy like Khalil Shakir who doesn't have a lot of drops, then I'm all for it.
And we were talking about 2 different flavors of receiver, a true X downfield explosive guy in Brian Thomas Jr., and a slot with some versatility, best hands in class, extremely good route runner in Pearsall. No third-round pick.
Also on top of that, too, if he can bring out some chemistry in Justin Shorter, who we haven't seen anything from yet, then you're basically drafting another guy, right? Then you have 3 wide receivers now.
Yeah, very one of the worst, weakest in the league, potentially like one of the best. No third round pick. So, but like we said, you could pick one with a trade back or whatever. Round 4, pick 128 overall. Tyler Davis, defensive tackle, Clemson.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, round 4 again, pick 130. There's a lot of day 2 picks here, or day 3, I should say. Round 4, pick 133 overall. This is arguably the best running back in the class, either him or Jonathan Brooks from Texas, who's coming for torn ACL. I don't know how he's here, but Jalen Wright, running back from Tennessee, there's your power rushing element. I think this would be like great value here.
I think so too. And I think just to add on to what you were saying about running back, both here and previously, I think it makes sense that the Bills draft a running back at some point. I mean, both of the guys that they had like all the running back committee they had all last season behind James Cook isn't there anymore. So you need to add a guy somehow. And obviously the cheapest option is through the draft. And we both know that the Bills have a history of drafting running backs on like days 2 and 3 specifically. So I would not be shocked.
Like this running back is a pretty weak and down class. There's some gems in there. So I think you're looking at it. I think a pretty good one would be here in the 4th round because I don't think any running backs go in the top 50. I think the first running back doesn't go until like Jonathan Brooks or Jalen Wright, like I was saying, till the early 3rd round, the earliest.
This definitely isn't going to be like last year where you have 2 running backs in the 1st round. We're not going to see a running back draft in the 1st round.
Or 2nd, probably.
Probably.
Not round 4, 5 5th round picks. So round 5, pick 144 overall. I think this is great, but Keaton Oladapo, safety, Oregon State. There's your 3rd safety immediately.
Love it.
Round 5 again. Oh, sorry. Round 5, pick 160 overall. Not much later. Brennan Jackson, edge, Washington State. This is one of the better like day 3 gems, if you will, in terms of the edge class. Round 5, pick 163. This is a popular one I've been taking like every 9 out of 10 simulators I've done. Drake Nugent, center, Michigan. If the center thing doesn't work for Connor McGovern, well, here's Drake Nugent. So
I was going to say at some point, we've seen teams go through this where a new guy's taking snaps and it just doesn't work out. And then you got to go back to the familiarity and get a new guy at center. So I think drafting a center in one of the later rounds just makes too much sense.
Yeah, we talk about a 4th corner, needing a 4th corner, maybe a backup slot to Taron Johnson or just a special teams guy to replace Dane Jackson. Pick round 6, pick 200, Nehemiah Pritchett, corner from Auburn, so that fills that need.
Mm-hmm.
Round 6, pick 204, Christian Boyd. I'm doubling up on defensive tackle again in Northern Illinois because Daquan Jones is getting up there. I still think he's awesome, but 2-year deal. Austin Johnson's just a 1-year deal. I think this is your direct backup to Ed Oliver between Tyler Davis and Christian Boyd.
See, I'm not sure if you would need to draft 2 defensive tackles because, like you said, there is already a little bit of depth there, but obviously under unforeseen circumstances gets hurt. Then you have a little bit of leeway. But between the 3 guys they currently have on the roster, you absolutely need to draft a defensive tackle at some point in this draft. I don't know if you would need 2, but 1 is definitely a must.
Yeah. And then this has been a popular pick for me in these simulators as well. Final pick, 10th pick, round 7, pick 248 overall. Steel Chambers, linebacker, Ohio State. First 2 years, Ohio State plays running back, keeps the running back number 22 or 25 or whatever. Then he switches to linebacker. So tons of athleticism there. Between Balin Spector and mostly Steel Chambers, you feel like you have your Tyler Matakevich replacement for years to come on special teams.
I like that.
Okay, well, seems like we like that simulation a lot. So, Zach, thank you again for coming on today. I know this lingered a bit, but we had a lot to say, obviously. So let people know where they can find you and your stuff.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said thank you for coming on today. Let people know where they can find you and all your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at @C_Lang13. I post about the Bills every now and then. And as you can tell by my backdrop, I post a lot about Star Wars. So if you like Star Wars and Bills content, just check out the Twitter handle.
Yeah, well, thank you again for chatting Bills Day. I'm sure we'll talk as the season gets closer, but this is a really great conversation. I think a big takeaway for this is just don't box yourself into a certain outcome. Like, don't go to bed Thursday night being like so angry and mad and sleeping bad because there's still Friday and there's still Saturday.
Right. Wait for the full draft picture. That's the name of the game.
Then you can be mad after that.
Exactly. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you.